Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Es realmente un placer estar aquí. Una disculpa por el aspecto, ¿no? Pero el aspecto, ya ven que dicen que también es una disidencia y el metal es todo acerca de disidencias, ¿no? Entonces, ahora vamos a estar presentando al doctor Brian Bardeen. Brian, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well. I'm looking for my PowerPoint put up here. Oh, there it is. Okay, good.
Perfect. I will just explain a little bit of how this presentation will work.
Okay.
I'm gonna do a brief introduction and then
Okay.
you can take it away, okay?
Can you see what's on the screen? Can you see what's up there? Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Brian. Entonces vamos a comenzar. Voy a leer una breve biografía del doctor Brian Bardeen. El doctor Brian Bardeen está entrando en su año número 21 en el departamento de inglés de la Universidad de Dayton. Él enseña los cursos de estudios de metal, composición y literatura americana y gótica, así como también de cine. Su tercera colección editada, Living Metal, Metal Scenes Around the World, a través de Intellect, con el doctor Jerome Stewart, estará saliendo en diciembre. Este libro sigue a sus dos previas Heavy Metal Studies and Popularity a través de Intellect con Mika Elovara en el 2017. Durante este tiempo en la Universidad de Dayton, él ha sido el principal organizador de dos conferencias de metal, Metal and Cultural Impact en el 2014 and the Metal in Strange Places en el 2016. Él ha sido el presidente ejecutivo de la International Society for Metal Music Studies por 4 años y antes de eso era miembro ordinario. Sus publicaciones recientes han analizado aproximaciones al estudio de la composición, así como a la enseñanza de la composición, a los estudios de metal y una examinación a la escena de metal de Dayton, así como también un análisis de la literatura gótica en las características de las letras de la New Wave of British Heavy Metal. Su más reciente proyecto se basa en un análisis de las escenas metaleras, particularmente de la escena de Dayton, y su próximo proyecto con el doctor Nelson Barros Díaz y con Niall Scott es una serie en música extrema llamada o titulada Extreme Sound Studies, Global Social Cultural Explorations. Este primer libro en la serie es editada por Bardeen, por Varas Díaz y por Scott. El capítulo de Bardeen lleva de nombre Extremity and Obsession in Gothic Literature. So, Brian, you can go ahead. The Zoom floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Omar. And thank you, Alfredo, for the invitation to present here. This seems like it's been a really great conference. And I hope that we'll have a good conversation when I'm done with my part of this. The name of my presentation is Visual Representations of Horror and Metal, a Personal Exploration. Metal music has always been a part of my life, though it wasn't until about 20 years ago that it began to become my favorite genre. Growing up in Akron, Ohio, I listened to whatever was on the radio or it was on MTV, with no real focus or understanding of different types or genres of music. In the 1980s, MTV was huge and it actually played music videos, unlike today. It wasn't until I got to college and discovered the Headbangers Ball that every Saturday night that metal started to take on a more prominent role in my musical taste, though it still was nowhere near as important as it would become later. I would get back to my dorm or house by midnight, order pizza, grab some beers, and listen and watch metal for a few hours. My roommates were not fond of metal. In fact, one of them went so far as to destroy the cassette tape I had of Dio's Holy Diver twice. It was on the third time that I bought it that I found a better hiding place so that he couldn't destroy it again. One of the aspects about being a metal fan is we are the most loyal fans anywhere. It didn't matter that my friends destroyed my cassettes, and it didn't matter that I knew no one else who liked metal in college and only one person in high school. And it didn't matter that I would get made fun of for liking this music. I think being put down because of my passion for it made it all the more important to me. And over time, it continued to become more prominent, a prominent part of who I am as a fan, and eventually a metal studies scholar. I think a lot of metalheads felt on some level separate from the mainstream because of their affinity for the music and culture. And while they may have felt ostracized a bit with the mainstream, they found a much stronger bond with other metal fans and the metal community. I have to say, while I certainly had some friends make fun of my choices, I never felt so far removed that I had a hard time in school or with my friends. When people find out that I'm a metalhead, they invariably say to me, "You just don't look like someone who likes that music." Clearly connecting to the stereotypes associated with those of us who love the music and culture. Once they know that I liked it and I wasn't going to change my musical preferences, they usually let it go. And in the process, it strengthened my connection to the music. When I think about horror and metal, the first thing that come to my mind are the visual aspects of the genres. The t-shirts, the battle jackets, the album covers, the videos, and even the lyrics, particularly with the more extreme bands. I've always been someone who has liked the rush of being scared on some level. I enjoy horror movies. In fact, I teach horror film courses at the University of Dayton. I enjoy the works of Stephen King, Edgar Allan Poe, Matthew Lewis, Anne Radcliffe, and Peter Straub, to name a few. How do metal and horror connect to one another and enhance the other? Much of metal music has horrific imagery, not only in the lyrics, but also on the t-shirts, battlejack patches, album covers, all of that. Horror films bring in similar image in the violence of some of the videos, as well as the look of the antagonists. Would Michael Myers be as scary without the face covering? Consider the images that bands like Cannibal Corpse and Iron Maiden use. Both bands, though their musical styles are quite different, have relied on very specific imagery on their merchandise, stage shows, and album art to great effect. So it's a natural progression to connect metal and horror. Maybe the most important aspects of bringing the two together is that the fans love it, and at least in part, those images help to sell the band's music and merchandise. The purpose of this presentation is to make connections between metal and horror, but to do so by examining my own experiences with both. I'm going to use my own t-shirts, album art, and lyrics from my albums to make these connections, and along the way make clear connections not only between metal and horror, but also share with you my own story in metal, one that I bet in some ways is similar to many of your own. The first part of this will be on album art. The first section of my presentation will examine the album art on some of my favorite albums. 3 of the 4 choices are from extreme metal bands. Generally, extreme bands tend to have more evocative and often brutal and grotesque art on their album covers. Each of these choices were important for me because they represent parts of my life and belief systems, excuse me. I've included Ozzy's Speak of the Devil because it's the first album that I bought, and it introduced me to who would become one of my favorite musicians. The second cover, Swallow the Suns, The Morning Never Came, was important because it introduced me to Finnish metal, and it was one of the main reasons I took my students to see them when they toured with Amorphis. The third album, Cannibal Corpse's Evisceration Plague, is important because it's clearly the most horrific of the 4, and the band tells great mini horror stories. I also like this album because my favorite Cannibal Corpse song is on it, the title track. The final album, Cow Decapitations, The Anthropocene Extinction, is important because they were the first band that I learned was so committed to the environment. Each band is important for the reasons listed above, but more importantly because their covers examine horror in different and creative ways. When I was about 14 years old, my mother drove me to a record store. This is when there were record stores, and let me go in to pick out an album. This was long before CDs or MP3s or Spotify. And one of the first albums I saw was Ozzy Osbourne's Speak of the Devil, that you can see up on the screen. It shows a fanged Ozzy screaming at the buyer with blood coming out of his mouth. Above Ozzy's head is a bat, also flashing some fangs, looking ominous. The image is surrounded in black with the name of the album and Ozzy's name in yellow, which makes it stand out all the more. I didn't care who the artist was or what kind of music it was. The image drew me in and reminded me of the types of books I was reading and enjoying at that time, and still do. That was the first album that I ever bought, and I knew nothing about Ozzy or Black Sabbath, or even that he was a metal musician. It didn't matter. I've bought many albums based solely on the covers, and for the most part, I've enjoyed them. The image drew me in. It was later that I became a fan of his in Black Sabbath. The second album cover is The Morning Never Came by Finnish death doom band Swallow the Sun. It's the first studio album by the band. Like their music, the album cover is quite dark and gloomy. At the top of the cover is the band's name in white in large print, and just below in smaller print, the album's title. The image on the cover is a farmhouse in winter. It almost looks like a barn. It's very tall, and the only light coming from the house comes from the top floor, and we see the light emanating from two windows, one in the front and one on the side. The house looks like it's made out of wood, and along the rooftop, icicles are hanging. The bottom windows are dark. In the foreground is a broken wooden fence with snow-covered bushes behind. To the left of the house is an old tree whose branches are almost reaching the top of the house, which adds to the gloominess of the scene. The sky is black and seems to be pressing down on the house. There are shades of dark green in places, usually just to clarify certain images, like the front of the house or part of the imposing tree. The horror in this cover comes from a couple places. First, as the viewer, I want to know what's happening in the house. And because of all the darkness and the contrast with the bright light, I'm immediately, because of my affinity for horror films, assuming that something very bad will be happening soon. Second, the colors on the cover are very dark and are meant, at least on some level, to make the viewer uneasy. This cover fits perfectly with the mood and the music that Swallow the Sun creates. They're a band who has been compared to Candlemass and My Dying Bride, two of doom metal's legends. I took my students to see them with Amorphis, as I said, and though my students preferred Amorphis because they weren't as depressing as Swallow the Sun, those are my students' words, I really was mesmerized by their performance. Like many metal fans, I started out listening to the traditional bands like Iron Maiden, Dio, and Judas Priest, to name a few. The older I got and the more interested I became in the breadth of genres of metal, and I then started to listen to more extreme bands. One of the bands that really turned my head was Cannibal Corpse. As someone raising two daughters, the lyrics and imagery were a bit of a tough sell for me, but I've always liked the music first, and as someone who's a big fan of horror movies, Cannibal Corpse was the perfect band for me. I can't say that I listen to them as much as my old standbys, but when I feel the need to be more extreme, I go to Cannibal Corpse. One of my favorite albums and album art is Evisceration Plague. Cannibal Corpse is known for having some of the most gruesome and offensive album art in music. And this one, while not nearly as gory or offensive as the art on Tomb of the Mutilated or Butchered at Birth, for me is still definitely horrific because of the images and the colors that artist Vince Locke chose to use for the cover and the inside pages. This album cover immediately jumped out at me because of the familiar Cannibal Corpse logo at the top. The two words are written in dripping blood. There are only two primary colors on the whole cover, black and red, which adds to the horror because both are connected with death and violence. The primary image on the cover shows 6 zombies, though only 2 in the foreground can be seen clearly. Those are the 2 that I'll talk about. On the left side of the image, the zombie has bulging red eyes and is glowering in the distance. His features are stressed and he is not wearing a shirt. His frame looks emaciated. The other zombie is on the right side of the cover, directly opposite of the first, and he seems to be staring down at something, maybe his next prey. His eyes are black and he is holding some kind of weapon in his right hand. At the bottom of the cover are the words Evisceration Plague, with each letter decaying from the bottom of each word. The words are written in dark gray and have red outlines. The horror in this cover is obvious. To my mind, the band wants us to believe we are the prey that the zombies are preparing to attack. Vince Locke's cover design, with the menacing faces and the use of black and red throughout, adds to the notions of violence, death, and desperation that the prey must be feeling before the attack begins. A quick note, on the inside of the lyric sheet or the lyrics booklet is a full-page image of dozens of zombies who are essentially eviscerating themselves and others, be they zombies or those who have not yet been turned. Final album I like to talk about in this section is Cattle Decapitation's The Anthropocene Extinction. Cattle Decapitation is a death grind band whose primary focus throughout their career has been to write about taking care of the planet, and specifically how humans are harming the planet and its inhabitants. The image on this album is striking in that the band is trying to show what happens to humans and to the world when they're not taken care of. In the foreground of the cover is a dead man. A dead man is lying prone on the beach, mouthed in a death scream. His midsection is torn apart, and what looks like pieces of plastic and other harmful man-made creations are lying in and around him. By his feet sit many plastic water bottles, and a dead bird is lying on the sand next to him. Another man, also dead, lies in the background, also with his midsection exposed. Farther back on the beach is a huge pipe spewing chemical waste into the ocean. On the back of the image is a tower belching smoke into the air. Piles of garbage are littered around the beach, and what looks like a factory is in the top right corner of the cover. The message is clear on this cover. We are destroying the earth and ourselves by the pollutants we put into the air, the ocean, and ourselves. The horror in this image is seen on multiple levels. The two dead men are drawn in ways that imagine horrible, painful deaths. The dead bird lets the viewer know that this doesn't just affect humanity, but wildlife as well. And finally, the environment is being destroyed by humanity's own hands. The colors on this cover are interesting in that there's very little black. For the most part, it's different shades of green and some white. To my mind, I see this difference helping to more clearly show all of the different things going on in the cover. Since it isn't as dark, the different images can be seen more clearly and with greater effect. The band's logo is a dark yellow cover, and some who are not familiar with it may not be able to read it, though it's not nearly as difficult to understand as other extreme metal bands' logos. Looking at these covers, the four of them, reminds me that of the creativity and diversity of the artist's approaches. Regardless of the band, in each case, the artists have been able to connect to the messaging in the albums through the images they created. Whether the artist is making an environmental statement, like in Cattle Decapitation's cover, or whether the image is meant to make a play on the reputation of the musician, like Ozzy Osbourne's, or design the cover to connect with a popular song, as in Cannibal Corpse's cover, the connections are obvious. And in every case, the blending of metal and horror is paramount. The next section I like to look at are the videos. So for these, I have stills of mostly the album covers because I wasn't able to get actual scenes from the films. Music videos were everywhere when I was in high school and college. As I said, MTV started when I was just 13, and I can remember watching the first video. It was called Video Killed the Radio Star by the Bungles, who were definitely not a metal band. But still, MTV hooked me. A few years later, when glam metal broke in the States, Ozzy's music was on constant rotation. In this section, 3 of the 4 videos I'm examining come from the 80s. Bark at the Moon by Ozzy, Iron Maiden's The Number of the Beast, and Slayer's Angel of Death. The other is from the 2000s, Cannibal Corpse's Kill or Become. I picked each because of their clear connections to horror, obviously, but also because they look at it in very different ways. Ozzy's is a take on werewolf lore. Maiden's references famous British and Hollywood classic horror characters and themes. Slayer's Angel of Death looks at the atrocities committed by Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele in very disturbing ways. And finally, Cannibal Corpse looks at horror through a zombie apocalypse. Regardless of the approach, each of the videos does an effective job incorporating horror throughout. One of the things that has always fascinated me about Headbangers Ball were the videos themselves, obviously. Some were nothing more than concert footage or the band playing in a soundstage with a few people brought in to look like a real crowd. The ones that caught my eye the most were the ones that had a story and were trying, at least on some level, to make you uneasy or even scare you. I can remember Ozzy Osbourne's video for Bark at the Moon, where the scientist, played by Ozzy, becomes a werewolf. Eventually, Ozzy is taken to an insane asylum where the monster and the man are separated by the end of the video. Ozzy is seen leaving with his wife, and he looks to the roof of the asylum and sees the werewolf looking down on him. For an 18-year-old college student, this really isn't scary. Though as someone who loves horror films and literature, I certainly appreciated the effort. I can also appreciate that the video director tried to make the aesthetics of the video appropriate to the time period, particularly with the clothes, hairstyles, and physical settings of the video. The werewolf makeup was effective as well. Another song and video that I've always loved, not only because of the video, but because the song itself can make someone a bit frightened, is Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast. The lyrics themselves told a cool story about a guy who witnesses a satanic sacrifice. For a teenager interested in horror movies and metal, this was a gold mine. The band has claimed that this song was meant to be a dream, which is fine, but the story is still made for a horror film. The video itself brought famous horror characters in snippets as the band is shown playing on a soundstage complete with smoke and dark lighting. We are shown Lon Chaney Jr.'s werewolf, Nosferatu, Godzilla, as well as a skeleton head, a huge spider, and at the conclusion of the video, a 10-foot tall Eddie walks onto the stage among the band members. I played this song and shown this video to my students over the years, and invariably it's clear that some have taken offense to the theme and the imagery in the song, but I've always found the lyrics work well to analyze because it's a clear story and our discussion can bring in the Bible and the meaning of 666. Songs like this are controversial, obviously, because of the role of Satan in sacrifice, but more importantly, they're necessary because they look at a part of our world that most people don't want to talk about, which is one of the reasons that so many metalheads became fans in the first place. The third video I'd like to discuss is Killer Be Come by Cannibal Corpse. Like many of the band's videos, the action is split between a story being told and the band performing, though not usually in a concert hall. It's usually they're in a setting similar to where the video is being shot. This video shows a man with a chainsaw killing zombies, and as the song suggests, either he kills them or he becomes one. The scenes with the man and the zombies are in black and white, reminiscent of George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Intermittent shots of zombies eating body parts of the dead are shown, usually just before the man comes to kill them. The video is quite gory, though the gore is a bit muted because the film is shot in black and white. The horror comes out as we see the behavior of the zombies cannibalizing one another and the already deceased, the man killing the zombies, and even as we see Corpse Grinder singing during the video. His face is splattered with blood. The scenes with the band performing take place in a barn and they are in color, as opposed to the black and white images of the zombies. The band has called their lyrics 4-minute horror movies, and in Killer Be Come, there is clearly a story. The man does not succumb to the zombies, and as the song ends, he is seen walking toward the camera, bloodstained, with his chainsaw slung over his back. The last song I like to talk about video is Angel of Death off Slayer's Rain and Blood album. This song has been the subject of controversy since its release in 1986 on the album Rain and Blood. The song is essentially a documentary which details the horrific crimes of the Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele and his underlings who performed these tests on prisoners in the German war camps. The video itself is a collection of black and white still images, as well as some films of experiments on the prisoners. I have to say that the longer I watched the video, the more difficult it became to continue viewing, particularly at the end when the films showed doctors working on their prisoners. What makes these videos so horrific for me is the looks on their faces, the pain they are in, and the knowledge that these emaciated individuals probably will not survive the war. The video shows several snapshots of piles of bodies thrown haphazardly together. Early in the video, there are images of doctors taking measurements of different parts of children's bodies. The children seem to not understand the reasons for these measurements. There are also a couple still photos of twins. Mengele did multiple experiments on twins, from transfusing blood between them to forced insemination, or even giving them diseases just to see the results. The video also shows Hitler speaking to a crowd, and later Nazi soldiers sitting and singing, though I couldn't tell what they were singing because Slayer's vocals were playing over them. There were several images of concentration camps and multiple individual pictures of dead and decaying human bodies. The horror in this video is obvious. Anyone with any compassion or sympathy would feel moved by the images that appear in the video, and the horror comes from just remembering what happened to so many millions of people during World War II. Of the videos I've seen, this one has been the most difficult to watch. I almost turned it off at one point. What makes this video even more horrifying is that the images are of real people who were prisoners of the Nazis, people many of whom probably did not survive the war. It shows a level of intimacy that we don't usually get in music videos, particularly metal videos. Furthermore, even though a video like this is difficult to watch, it is necessary because it can show a younger generation the horrors of war and remind people about what happened so that it can never happen again. One of the most important aspects of metal is that many bands examine the history of our world or the literature and do so in a way that can prompt discussion and learning. That's one of the reasons I show some of these videos to my students. It's a great way to start a discussion. It's a great way to learn to analyze not only the videos, but also the lyrics. That is when metal videos are most successful. Slayer's video is a perfect example of this. The next section is about t-shirts, and you would get to see some of my t-shirts. How ratty they look. Okay. When I think about metal and horror, the first thing that comes to my mind are the amazing, brutal, gruesome t-shirts that I have in my dresser. It seems almost every time I go to a metal show, I come back with a t-shirt. So far, I have upwards of 50 shirts, much to the dismay of my ever-patient wife. If it's a local show, I will typically purchase one as a way to support a local band so that they can take home a small amount of money and to wear to my classes and get the chance to talk about the band to my students. Metal shirts are so important to understanding who a band is, what they sing about, what messages they're trying to portray to their audience, and in many cases, how they see the world. In this section, I'll be showing you some of my favorite shirts in my collection and talking about where the horror comes in. Obviously, I'm sure the bands have many reasons to explain the imagery, fonts, colors, and the placement of images on their shirts. And as a fan of metal t-shirts, I like to believe that they put a lot of thought into each and every shirt that they sell. The first shirt is by Slayer. I got this shirt on Slayer's final tour. Great show. My eyes were immediately drawn to two things when I saw the shirt hanging at the merch booth. The name of the band in bright white slanted letters at the top of the shirt, and the 3 upside down crosses which surround the band's name. Obviously, the religious imagery stands out. Next, a menacing black horned demon is sitting on a throne holding a bloody sword. Below the demon's feet are the mutilated bodies of presumably those he has murdered. The shirt is black with mostly dark colors around the image of the demon, who is also black. The colors work well together. Virtually every metal shirt I own is black, with the exception of my Kverlatak shirt, which is actually yellow, which always adds to the horror aspect because the shirts are black. I can easily picture this demon in any supernatural horror film. The menacing look on its face, the bloody sword, and the dead lying around it add to the scare factor. The images on the shirt fit well with Slayer's themes throughout their long career. anti-religion, the supernatural, violence, and darkness. Next shirt is by the band Suffocation. I saw this seminal death metal band play a show at Dayton's main venue for metal, Odd Bodies Music Room. I have a tendency when I have had a shirt for a long time to cut the sleeves off and use it as a workout shirt. You can see that in this image that I did a poor job in cutting off the sleeves. The image on the shirt is the same one that's on the cover of the album Pinnacle of Bedlam. The first image that caught my eye was the band's name and the creepy font that the band has used on all of its albums. The letters blend together and almost look like tree branches with the ends grabbing the air. The color of the name is a muted white in shadow, which bleeds into the main image of the shirt, which is a robed creature holding the scales of justice above its head. The scales are on one side overflowing with gold, and on the other side, people are clinging to the scale. The gold far outweighs the people. The creature is rising above a fallen city, and images of fire and destroyed buildings surround it. The creature's hands and face are skeletal, and its primary color is dark blue and black with bright yellow eyes. Protruding from its face are tentacles. The image here is obvious, that our culture glorifies power and money over people, and the world's being attacked because of this greed. As a death metal band, Suffocation's themes address violence and dark imagery. This image is a perfect example of the band's consistent approach to metal, and they do so in a terrifying way. Imagining a creature like this attacking a city is mindful of movie monsters like Godzilla, Mothra, or Gigan. The third shirt I'd like to talk about is by Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden is known almost as much for its incredible imagery, both in songs and on its merch, as it is for its music. This particular shirt was from the Maiden England North American tour, and it features Maiden's mascot Eddie dressed in an 18th century torn British Army uniform, riding his horse into battle, carrying a bloody sword and spear with the Union Jack tied to it. The image looks like Eddie is leading the charge against the colonists, as there are more horsed Eddies behind him. His skull has a clip on the top to keep his brain from falling off, and his mouth is open, showing his teeth. His eyes are red, and his face has a hateful look. His horse is black and is also staring out toward the enemy, looking angry. Cannons are seen firing in the background, and smoke and fire surround the soldiers. At the top of the shirt, the famous Iron Maiden logo is in red with a white outline. The shirt harkens back to other Maiden shirts, which incorporate history, at least on some level. The shirt was from a U.S. tour, so the image of a British soldier attacking American colonial army connects to the Revolutionary War. For this image, like all Maiden's images with Eddie, he is the center of the shirt, and he always has a monstrous look on his face, which certainly connects the military theme with horror. Final shirt I'd like to talk about in this section is by German-American band Demons and Wizards. I had a hard time deciding for this last shirt because I love this band, but you may know that the John Schaefer from Iced Earth, is the demon in this band, and he was one of the ones who stormed our Capitol. I got rid of all my Iced Earth stuff, but because this isn't just him, I kept this shirt, and I really like this shirt. So I felt awkward with it, but I chose it anyway. The image on the shirt is the same as the band's first album cover. At the center of the black shirt is the fiddler, aka the Grim Reaper, playing his fiddle in a cemetery. Sitting on the ground on either side of him are two young children, a boy and a girl. The fiddler is wearing a dark robe with a hood, and his hands and face are skeletal. The two children are sitting quietly at his feet, looking up at him. The night is dark, with a partial moon above the fiddler's left shoulder. There is a lit lantern between the children on the ground and a long staircase, presumably leading up to heaven. Tombstones are on either side and behind the fiddler. The song that this shirt represents is Fiddler on the Green, probably Demons and Wizards' most famous song. I spent much time thinking about this shirt because I know the song's meaning. The boy was taken by the fiddler too early. So the fiddler has decided to take the girl to be with the boy because they were to have been husband and wife when they grew up. The song itself is sad, but there also could be some hope because the two children will be together. The image, however, is horrific because of the fiddler, the darkness, the setting, and that these two children are dead. Unlike most fonts and colors which usually accompany metal logos, the lettering on the shirt is gold with black enmeshed in some parts. The font looks like one that typically would be used for fantasy fiction, which makes sense since much of Demons and Wizards catalog deals with fantasy themes. If I didn't know the meaning of the song, then the shirt would have been even more horrific than it already is. In today's world, much of the income bands accrue comes from sales of their merchandise. So depending on the genre of metal and the themes that the bands use in their songs, t-shirts can be one of the primary means of making much of an income when they're on the road. The shirts listed above are from 4 different genres: thrash, death, new album, and power metal. Though each of the shirts is horrific based on several things: the colors the bands chose to include in the shirt's images, the black base of all the shirts, the individual images in each shirt, in some cases, the actions taking place in the shirts, and the overt or sometimes covert violence that either has or will occur. When the shirts are done well, there's a marriage between the colors, the font of the logos, and other words, the images to the themes that the bands address in their music, and the way that those images connect with fans. I purchased each of these shirts for several reasons, but first and foremost because I had an immediate connection with the images and my own understanding of the bands and their music. The horror connections were important as well because I can see these images as part of horror stories or narratives that I might read or connect with in some way. The last section to talk about are the lyrics. Thus far, all of the sections of this presentation have examined visual images on physical things, album art, t-shirts, and music videos. In this section, I will be examining the horror that comes from song lyrics. Analyzing the lyrics can be more difficult because not only do you have to consider if there's a message, but also how the band is telling the story or visualizing it for the listener. In this section, I'm looking at horror in 4 different ways: the horror of war, the horror within a shattered mind, the horror of a cannibal culture, and finally, the horror of satanic sacrifice. There's no perfect or best way to bring horror out in lyrics. It's very difficult, but each of the examples below do so in creative and imaginative ways. Even if I didn't like the album cover or the band's logos, reading the lyrics on the back of the album could still convince me that I needed that album and would purchase it. The only album art that I didn't like of these 4 examples was the art on Black Sabbath's Paranoid album. But with so many great songs on the album, I didn't pay attention to the cover other than to say it doesn't match what's happening on with the music. Anyway, each of the lyrics on these songs were influential in my wanting to purchase the albums, as well as incorporating a variety of approaches to horror. The first song I'd like to discuss is Black Sabbath's War Pigs. The album comes from the band's second album, Paranoid. Most people unfamiliar with metal don't think about it as a genre that takes a stand on many issues. With this song, Black Sabbath is taking a powerful stand against war, presumably Vietnam, since it was still raging upon the album's release. Geezer Butler's lyrics incorporate many occult symbols and characters, including witches, sorcerers, and Satan himself, all the while condemning those that start the war, the politicians, and those who do their bidding, the generals. The song also is visually intense when the band mentions bodies burning and the ashes left over once the world has been destroyed. They take a shot at the politicians again, criticizing them for sending the poor to war while they stay home and do nothing. They compare the generals to witches holding a black mass and essentially plotting the end of the world. They compare, The band gets the last laugh, though, when at the end of the song, when the politicians and generals beg God to save them, he abandons them and Satan gets them. Clearly, the horror in these lyrics, is in the brilliant imagery, that Butler writes, in the pain of war, the fact that Satan wins in the end, and the fact that the world as we know it comes to an end. The next song is Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast, which is on the album of the same name. I mentioned this song earlier for its video, but now I like to examine the lyrics, which more clearly get the band's message across. Steve Harris, bass player and one of the primary songwriters, has said this song came to him in a dream, which are in the lyrics. Early in the song, the narrator is questioning his own sanity when he says, "What did I see? Can I believe? Just what I saw in my old dreams. Were they reflections of my warped mind talking or staring back at me?" The narrator can't believe what he thinks he saw. Was just in his head, or did he really see it? In the second half of the song, we get a more visual image of what may have happened. He describes a satanic ritual. Torches blazed and sacred chants were praised. As they start to cry, hands held to the sky. In the night, the fire's burning bright. The ritual has begun. Satan's work is done. Put yourself in the position of the narrator viewing a scenario like this. It would be terrifying and you probably couldn't wait to leave. Also, the song is horrific on two levels. First, that he feels like he can't trust his own mind. Is he insane? And second, he believes he has seen a physical representation of evil, a human sacrifice. By incorporating the narrator's psychological issues with the visual manifestation of a satanic ritual, Maiden has shown horror on two fronts, the mind and the eyes. The third song I like to talk about is one by Cannibal Corpse. It's the title track from the album Skeletal Domain. I goofed up on this picture. I apologize. I got them mixed up. This is actually a video, part from the video from Killer Become. The album Examining Horror and Metal can be really easy when you have a band like Cannibal Corpse and lyrics that they write. There are so many songs that I could have chosen to include in this section, virtually all of them on some level, but I wanted to pick one whose topic I haven't addressed yet in any of the examples. A Skeletal Domain is unique because of how the horror begins and who the antagonists are. The song opens by letting the listener know how these creatures were created. Trapped beneath rotting remains, a slow decay of life takes its form, withered death and bone emerge. It appears skeleton-like creatures are rising from their graves, but the band emphasizes they aren't human or zombie-like, which is different than anything in Cannibal Corpse's catalog that I know of. Not only do these beings rise from the dead, but they begin to take over the world. They write, "Not one thing left alive but them. The strongest will begin to reign. A new society takes place, where the way of the cannibal rules in this skeletal domain." The band wants you to imagine what the world would be like if these skeleton-like creatures ruled, and the only way they would survive is to cannibalize those who were not like them. For those that did not survive, who did survive the initial onslaught, their odds still would not be that great. Slaughtered are the weakest first, feeding those with evil. As blood of the dead saturates the ground, again the end has begun. Another kingdom will be damned. Cannibal Corpse has created a world being annihilated by cannibalistic skeleton beings whose only purpose is to feed on the living and destroy the world. This song would make an interesting horror film. Unfortunately, Cannibal Corpse doesn't tell us how to save the world, just how to destroy it. The final song I like to talk about is Ozzy Osbourne's Diary of a Madman, from the album of the same name. For me, this is my favorite Ozzy album. I think it is his heaviest, his most thoughtful, and it's also Randy Rhoads' last studio album, which makes it more special to me. I chose this song because it's an examination of someone losing their mind and the horror and pain that brings to them. It has been connected to Nikolai Gogol's short story of the same name. And while there are similarities, obviously Gogol goes into more depth because he can say more in a story than Ozzy can in a 6-minute song. The song opens with the narrator believing that he's not sane. Sanity now, it's beyond me. There's no choice. Because of some situation he's put himself in, he sees his demise. As the song continues, the narrator looks deeper into himself and wonders if someone else is in his mind with him. Could I mistake myself for someone who lives behind my eyes? Will he escape my soul or will he live in me? Is he trying to get out or trying to enter me? Toward the end of the song, he tells the listener that he is hearing voices and he realizes that he is going insane. Voices in the darkness scream away my mental health. The horror in this song comes from the continued deterioration of the mind and that the narrator is realizing it is happening and he can't stop it. I'd like to conclude with a short statement or conclusion. Each of these sections, I realize that there's some overlap in terms of the bands, but I remember I was using my own collection and I felt that some of these that I wanted to keep, the best examples I felt were the ones that I showed. I did have some hesitation a little bit with the Slayer song, but it's such a good song and I think there's so many interesting, it's so controversial. And I think, people who don't like it because of what's in it, I think they're missing the point. I think it's supposed to be a warning and it's supposed to be, and the graphicness of that video tells a really important story, as I said in my explanation. Okay, so in conclusion, there are many reasons to examine metal and horror, the most important of which is because they are so closely connected. Looking at the examples above, it's clear that not only are the two related, but also in many cases they enhance the other. For many extreme metal bands, the inclusion of horror in whatever style is necessary, and this goes beyond the bands I've included in this presentation. We study metal and horror because they say a great deal about metal culture or the culture or location of the particular band who uses horror themes and motifs in their music. It's worthwhile to study metal and horror because it is prevalent in the lyrics of a significant number of metal bands. Why is that? What does that say about the bands themselves and the genres which they populate? Answering these questions will enable researchers to understand more about the music and the culture. In working on this presentation, I've learned even more how closely metal and horror are linked. So many of my albums and merchandise are connected to horror. I began to wonder what that says about me as a metalhead and someone who enjoys this music and culture. Metalheads are passionate about the music and the culture, and even if I didn't like the horror aspects of the music, I'm certain I would still be a fan of metal. Just my focus may be a little more narrow. Regardless, without horror and metal, the genre is weakened, and a significant number of fans may not have connected with the music or the culture because of that. For whatever reason, horror runs through our society, whether in metal or in literature or in film or real life. It is everywhere, and because of that, it is necessary to study it and learn why it is so important. Maybe it's just because millions of people like to be scared or like the exhilaration of listening to metal or reading a horror novel or watching a horror film gives them. While that may be part of it, I think there is more to it. I think that horror is so ingrained in our culture because it is a response to the world around us. It is a way on some level to understand parts of our culture that many people don't want to look at or accept. And horror as well as metal do that. Thank you. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. And if there's any comments or questions, I would be happy to hear them and respond.
Thank you, Brian. That was a great conference. So yeah, we have some questions, Brian, okay, and we would like to answer. We have also some comments, some horns, and somebody that said that we love your t-shirts. We all love your t-shirts. I mean, that's obvious. I would like to also add as a comment of myself that this is an excellent exercise of self-reflection. I think that bringing the individual perspective, the life-to-life observation to a communal sense of metal identity, it's great. I know for sure that there were several of the attendees that actually can identify with your journey as a metalhead, right? So we're gonna start with the first question that is from Jose Garcia. He says, a Slayer video is a rude and cruel picture of the reality that we are the scariest monsters. Maybe it could be useful to create critical thinking about genocidal behavior and unethical practices.
Oh, absolutely. I before I started working on this, I never saw that video. I love the song, but I never knew they made a video for it. So when I obviously I watched it many times, and I think that would be a great, and I'm sure you could find, yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. And I don't have my metal. I have a course called Metals Cultural Experience. I don't have that course this semester. I have it next semester. So I will definitely show it, and we'll see what the student reaction is. Sometimes I think American students are, oh, I don't know, they don't look back enough. They don't look back at that history. And I think a video like that would show, wake them up a little bit. At least I hope it would. So yeah, I think that's a great comment, and I will. I wouldn't show it to my freshmen; they would be freaked out. But I would show it to upper level students because they would be more. I think they would be able to handle it a little bit better. I mean, most of the UD is not. My university is not. There's not that many metal people there. So when I get students in my metal class, mostly it's because they're just interested. They don't know anything about it. So they're willing to sort of look at things like that, or I can play black metal or talk about some of the stuff that's pretty intense. But for freshmen, especially first semester freshmen, I don't want to do that to them. But yeah, I think that's a great point. I love the Up the Irons comment there, because obviously that's Maiden, but I'm a huge West Ham fan. So that's a great, Hector. Thank you. Sorry.
Hector, and we have a question from Hector Torres. He says that the kind of horror that Slayer, Ozzy, Iron Maiden, and Cannibal Corpse show, could you think of black metal as that kind of horror, a la Exorcist, where Satan always triumphs?
Always, I'm sorry, always does what?
Triumphs.
Triumphs. Oh, could I use that? Is that what yeah, I mean, another reason to use that would be just because, and this goes back to Americans, because we're so arrogant. We think we always have to win, and it's a good thing when we get our asses kicked. So yeah, I can certainly see that the black metal stuff would be really interesting. And sometimes though they turn off when as soon as we start talking about it, and we talk about the occult and stuff like that. But I think, again, a lot of the stuff I just talked about with metal is that they need to see what else is going on. They need to understand that everything in their world is not rainbows and puppies. And I think looking at some of that music and that extreme music and the black metal stuff would open their eyes a little bit. So yeah, that would be I mean, I think it's good that we look at all that I look at all that stuff when I teach. And I didn't have any black metal bands here, obviously, and since I was focused only on my own my own sort of catalog, I only have a couple black metal. I mean, that's not my favorite genre. I look more at death metal when I go to the extreme stuff and thrash. But anyway, yeah, I think that would be really important to do that.
Great. And we have another question from Juan Carlos Silas from Guadalajara. He says that album covers and videos can be assumed as something of personal consumption, but shirts are to show. So why do you think that within the metal community, we enjoy showing the aberration or horror, on the shirts and all that imaginary of horror and terror?
why do we? I think because it shows our that we like horror, that we support the band. I mean, I'm wearing Iron Maiden right now, and it's you do that because you are you support the band, you support the images, you know. And I get looks when I go out, if I go to the grocery store and I'm wearing a t-shirt like this, but you know, whatever. I mean, you do that because the biggest thing for me is because I want people to know that this is the kind of music I like, and that I support their music, I support the images. And most metal people like it because we get to kind of, it's a good way to start a discussion. Also, if you're at a show, it's a good way to, even if you're at a place where there's not a lot of metal people, they can ask you questions about that. It can be a way to educate people too. Also, when you're out wearing something like this, I'll wear a metal shirt when I teach. I'll wear my battle jacket to class. And it's a good way to get some talking going. And for people like a UD, I'm kind of known as the metal guy, which is okay on some level, but also that's not all of who I am. But I think it's a good way to just show who you represent. You know, kind of like wearing a soccer jersey if you're a fan of a football club or whatever.
And we have another question from Ricardo Flores Tejada. Okay. He's from Mexico State. And he's asking if the t-shirts that we use show the dark side of what society, I mean, I'm thinking of normative society, can't look.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, some of the stuff like Eddie, we don't see any of that in society, I hope. But yeah, I mean, they absolutely do. And I think that's when, like the Cannibal Corpse, I don't have any Cannibal Corpse shirts. I like their music, but yeah, I haven't gotten one of those yet. But yeah, I mean, I think, and there's a reason why bands do those kinds of shirts. I mean, obviously sometimes it's the album cover, but also it can just making a statement about what they see is wrong with the world, right? Or like Iron Maiden, the shirt that I showed, that's history, right? They're talking about the Revolutionary War, which they lost, by the way. So, but yeah, so they have Eddie in there and fighting, right? And I think that's a way to make a statement about who they are. And sometimes it's not, you know, it's just they like having that kind of like the Cannibal Corpse things. I'm not sure they're making much of a statement other than they just want to freak people out. But other bands like the Cattle Decapitation album, that picture, that cover, it tells a massive story on that album cover, and that they've got shirts that have that also. It just depends on who the bands are and what their focus is in their lyrics, I guess, you know. And I don't, you know, Cannibal Corpse is not a band that I think is trying to make a huge statement about the world, but a band like Cattle Decapitation or Gojira, those kind of bands, they are, you know. And I think we need both of those, right? And you know, I think it's an interesting. That's why I get so many of them too. I mean, I've got more black T-shirts than any other kind of shirt in my closet. So. Which sometimes can be a problem when I have to dress up, but you know, whatever, that's fine.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. So we have a last question, and this is a really important question. So we're going to take just the time to answer this the fastest that we can. It's okay. From Alfredo Nieves. Alfredo Nieves is pointing out that we have a perception from the global South that our adscription of metal and horror is motivated by the social context, you know, imperialism, violence. What happens in the United States? Do you have also like a critical position in front of the consumption of horror and metal?
Can you say that again? Oh, sorry. What's the?
Yes. The question is, what happens in the United States with this? Because obviously the differences, the cultural differences between the global South and the global North, and the consumption of metal and horror. We are adscribed to our context, to our violent context in Latin America specifically. But what happened in the United States? Do you have any critical thinking about this kind of horror and violence that is shown within the American bands?
You mean, are they making a statement about the global South? Is that what you're, or are bands just thinking about like where their ideas come from? Is that what, like, I don't know that many North American bands are thinking about that. Unfortunately, they should be, especially if they're going to be touring in the global South, if they're going to spend time. Sometimes I wonder if, you know, the whole point of these shirts is to make them as just as evocative as they can, because they need to sell them. They need to make money. Now, a band like Iron Maiden doesn't have to worry too much about that, but smaller bands, you know, that can be how they survive when they go on tour. I don't know how much they really think about that, and as I said, I think they need to, because as I said before, there's a lot of arrogance just in American culture anyway, and I don't think it's quite as bad with metal, but I think that certainly there is some, and I don't know like how often a lot of the big metal bands come through Mexico. I assume they would, because there's a huge metal scene down there. But I would do. That's a really good question, and I hope. Okay, well, okay. Next, as hopefully you all know, next summer the Big Isms conference is in Mexico City, so that can be a great paper for somebody, whether it's me or somebody else, to do. I hope that can be one of our big topics. We're still obviously getting that together, and I think it's going to be a great conference. But thank you for that question. That does make me think quite a bit.
Thank you for your answer, Brian. Thank you for this conference. We're gonna wrap it up right now. We really appreciate your presence. We hope to keep inviting you, and if you can invite us, and just to share this kind of experience is just so fulfilling. So thank you very much, Brian. I'm gonna change to Spanish now. Okay. Vamos a continuar. Les agradecemos mucho a todos su presencia. A las 6, nos vemos aquí a las 6 con las conferencias siguientes del segundo tramo con Omar González, su servidor, y Alfredo Nieves. Nos vemos a las 6 y que pasen una buena tarde.